Welcome to SpringLaw's 2019 SpringForward Legal Updates Webinar Series. This series is designed to provide a comprehensive legal overview of key issues related to employment law and human rights in Ontario. SpringLaw is a virtual employment law firm advising on workplace legal issues for employers, employees, freelancers, and executives from a wide range of industries. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar and find it useful and informative. To reach our team, please visit SpringLaw at www.springlaw.ca. And now to our presenters.
Good morning and welcome to the SpringForward monthly webinar. This month is on Tech in the Workplace, Managing the Remote Worker. Today is the 7th webinar that we've done this year, and we welcome you. We have a large number of people attending our webinar today, so clearly remote work is a hot topic. We want to give a special welcome to some people from the People group that have joined us today. For those who are not familiar with People yet, it's a great HR and people ops community online. You should check it out, and welcome to those that are joining us here today. My name is Lisa Stam, and I'm one of the lawyers at SpringLaw. Presenting with me today is Marnie, Hilary, and Danielle. We are the employment, labor, and contracts lawyers at SpringLaw. If you are a client of ours, you already know how we work and what we do. For those that might be new, welcome. And welcome to our law community. We look forward to answering any questions you might have as we go along. Finally, for some more information about our firm and about SpringLaw, please feel free to go to our website, springlaw.ca, where we have a great award-winning blog. I shout out to Hilary, who does a ton of the writing for our firm. So people really seem to like the posts that we put out. We have a monthly newsletter that you're welcome to subscribe to, these free monthly webinars, innovative subscription program for employers, and a bunch of other resources. So check out our website if you have any questions. And then throughout the presentation today, if you have any questions, throw it into the chat of the software and we will try and get to it. If we can't, we will certainly reach out to you afterwards. The handout for the slide deck is also available in the just in the pull down of the program itself. If you can't figure it out, just give us a call about that as well afterwards. Okay, so today we're going to talk about why remote, some of the challenges with remote work, 5 hot tips that we want to share with you. Our firm is fully remote. We all work remotely. The 4 of us on this call right now are all over the province. And so we're excited to share with you some of the hot tips that we really deliberately use in our firm. We'll talk a bit about a case study, Basecamp. Most of you have heard of Basecamp, but they really are a leader in nurturing remote communities. We'll talk about legal considerations, of course, and addressing some of the common challenges and the takeaways. So, why remote? The new economy. I'm going to do the first slide, and then I'm going to be turning it over to the rest of the team to jump in here. So, the new economy. The why remote, there's a business case for remote working. So, our talk today is not so much a pitch to help employees have a better workplace, which obviously is always a huge benefit of making these decisions and a byproduct of these decisions. But the threshold question for us is the business case. With the new economy, with the information economy, technology and the online community has just changed businesses and workplaces forever, including law, of course, and any of the information services. Clients and customers, it's convenient that they may not need to drive in somewhere, find parking. They can just access your goods and services online. And so having a workforce that resonates with that is a business case. Cloud technology certainly allows us to access all of our information centrally from all different locations. So it really has changed and facilitated information and communications and just allowed for a much smoother process if you are working from different locations. You know, with if you've got your infrastructure set up that allows for the online business, it allows for, you've already got the infrastructure in place so that your employees can also tap into that. And it just allows for more collaboration overall, because we're all thinking, how do we do this in a paperless, cloud-based sort of way in order to service our clients? The service of products can often be delivered with more ease because of the setting up, you know, a modern approach to delivering this. And then, you know, many people really prefer working from home or from a location that they prefer, whether it's a co-working space, whether it's on a temporary basis, they're living somewhere else. Having that flexibility really matters. It's of course important to highlight an obvious caveat that certain industries, certain jobs, certain businesses can't be remote. You know, if you're a hospital and does surgery, if you're a bus transportation company, your drivers can't work remotely. So we fully appreciate that this is specific to certain types of industries and workplaces. But we are in the new economy, in the knowledge economy. So there's an increasingly broader range of businesses where this all just makes sense. So, you know, there has to be a business case before, you know, the employees are able to work from home. But I think that we're heading into a world where there's just a lot more options available, and it's tied into how people want to receive their goods and services. So why remote? I'm going to turn it over to Marnie.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. So a few more reasons for supporting remote workplaces in the right context, as Lisa said. So time savings. We don't have to commute if we're working from home full-time or even part-time. So the time we save, this is an obvious one, getting to and from work is a big bonus, and we get that back to deal with those nagging life maintenance tasks that we never seem to get to. And so, you know, also we have the luxury of throwing on some yoga pants and ponytail if we're not meeting with clients or having other meetings, and that's a big bonus. I mean, this face just doesn't come together easily. The time I get back when I don't have to see people, big bonus. Definitely kidding for those who don't know.
That's not true, Marnie. That's not true.
So the time, I mean, it's huge. It's a great value to all of us. I don't need to say any more than that. Increased productivity is a bonus, but of course, you need to, you know, the workforce needs to have the discipline and ability to focus to be productive at home. So we all know there are distractions in an office, and if we can hunker down at home and head down and get work done, that's great. But we all know there are also distractions at home, and so it does take a good amount of discipline to make sure we're focusing on work. And this is certainly not a situation where we're plopped at our dining room table with all the usual distractions in our kitchen or dining room and just trying to get client work out. No, we're set up and we're focused. We have professional offices, and it really takes that investment. We're going to talk more about that in this presentation, but this isn't just you know, a one-off at home. It's for one afternoon. It's, you have to really focus as an employer and set things up properly and really commit to the setup. Access to more talent. So lots of people don't want to or can't afford to live in urban centers, or for all kinds of other reasons want to be outside of city limits or in lovely, beautiful places. And that gives us access, or us employers, access to more talent, which is obviously a huge bonus. Those people and anyone who gets the opportunity to work remotely, if they want to, are more happy. And studies show that working from home increases happipiness and therefore reduces attrition rates, which need I say more? We all know that that's a great thing. Lowering costs. So a completely remote workforce means you don't have any kind of overhead that the traditional brick and mortar setup has. So I'm sure you founders and owners can think of lots of things that you could redirect those funds to. And if your workforce is partly remote, there are things like hot desk policies where shared surfaces and offices are used by a team at different times. And it can be a really efficient option so more cost savings there. And I'm going to turn it over to my next colleague.
Thanks, Marnie. Hi, everyone. So challenges with remote work. Not unlike the physical shared workplace, managing a remote workplace can come with its own challenges. It may be a challenge, at least at first, to keep tabs on your employees and to know what an employee is doing or how the employee is doing. If it's a large workplace, because you're not seeing workers in person every day, there's less opportunity to do little check-ins and keep up to speed with everyone. There could be difficulties in providing feedback and ensuring that the feedback is being received effectively. If you have a combination of employees in a physical shared workplace as well as remote employees, you may be more likely to forget or to keep the remote workers in the loop on things. And you may find that some of your remote employees lack efficiency. Some companies such as Yahoo and Reddit apparently ended their remote working programs due to this efficiency concern. But the reality is that these issues can really be a part of physical shared workplaces as well. So they're not unique to the remote environment. And I will pass it on to Hilary.
Yes. So I'm going to start us off on the hot tips, how to do remote work well. So our hot tip number 1 is to have a policy. Those of you who have attended our previous webinars know that we love policies. I feel like I'm always talking about policies, but policies are good because they set the expectations for the worker, and they allow the employer to rely on those expectations should things go wrong. So everybody sort of understands what is expected clearly, and then we can go from there. So a couple of special considerations for a remote working policy. If you have a workplace that is only partially remote, some roles, as Lisa was saying, are not going to be eligible. So the policy should define who is eligible to work remotely. Data security and cybersecurity is super important in a remote situation. You want to make sure that your employees, and we're going to talk about equipment a little bit later, but that the equipment is secure. So whether you provide it or not, you need to have two-step authentications and all of those things, just thinking about who could potentially access your employee's computer, and really, really tighten those things up, because you're not in a situation where you're locked in the office at the end of the day and everything's secure, right? If people are working from cafes, if they're working from their home office, if they're using a shared desk, that opens things up in a totally different way. Similar to that, you want to have a really tight client confidentiality provision in that policy. For example, if you allow your employees to work at home, do they need to keep any sort of paperwork they might have in a locked location where only they have the key, right? So thinking about, again, similar to the data security, like who could come into contact with stuff here, and really, really tightening that up in the policy. In September, we saw a Canada Labour Code amendment come into play, an interesting one that allows employees who have worked for 6 months for the employer to request flexible arrangements. And they can request remote work. And, this is in the law because, of course, anyone could request this, but they can request this and not be penalized. So they request it in writing. The employer is not allowed to turn around and say, oh, you're so lazy, you just want to work in your sweatpants. The employer needs to actually take the request seriously and respond in writing. And there are only certain reasons why this request can be denied, right? So some roles is just not going to work for, but I won't go through them all, but those are articulated in the legislation. And so we just raised this because it's a real thing that the federal government thinks is worthy of legislating. And, we are really seeing that push towards flexibility and remote working. And so this is in the Canada Labour Code, which, just to be clear, only applies to federally regulated employers. So that's like banks, transportation companies, airlines, like anyway, I won't go into them all. They're in the Constitution, but just to be aware of that. And I will turn it over to our next hot tip.
Okay, connectivity. Clearly, working remotely has its own issues around making sure that everyone are connected. You know, in a traditional bricks and mortar office, there's a lot of stuff that already happens. We have HR professionals that have been trained for decades now on different ways to build employee morale and how to communicate, and we rely on people running into each other at the water cooler. So there's a bunch of typical things that happen that we need to think through in the remote environment to make sure that everyone feels connected. So the first thing, the first hot tip we would suggest is to make sure if you are transitioning from a traditional environment to a remote, that you would have a test period with that employee to make sure that, or with that department or with that group, to make sure that you've got the systems all set up and that it's working. So, and have it ring fenced so that, you know, it's a test period, a trial period for 3 months, let's say, to give you time to work out the kinks, so that you can pull everyone back if it's not working for some reason. So it's just good to make sure you're testing it out and iterate and talk to people and see that everything is you know, naturally flowing. The key thing is you can't just replicate a physical bricks and mortar office with remote and think it'll be the same. There are definitely nuances to think through. Wellness is a big part of all of this, and so it's good to know what the environment will look like that your employee is going to be working in. If they're in a tiny condo downtown, how do we work into that ways that they are still socializing? Are they going to the gym? Are they moving around? Are they you know, if it's a business development type of role, do they have lots of opportunities to get out and meet people? Even if it's a very introverted person, they still, you know, we all need to feel like we belong. So I think it's important to really very much pay attention to the wellness piece of all of this. You know, maybe it's co-working space memberships to make sure that there's options for people who are maybe, especially in Canada, we have long winters. I have to say, when it's a really crappy snowy day out, I love that we are remote workers, but after a while it could be a little bit, you know, you just need to be mindful of people's environments. I think the biggest connectivity hot tip that tends to cause some problems is thinking through trust issues. How do you manage someone that you can't see? And it does require evolving the overall management approach. I mean, I think, you know, I think most people, well, actually, I don't know if most people, I think, you know, there's enough studies that show that an old school micromanaging, breathing over someone's shoulder kind of approach isn't effective. So either way, we all are looking to evolve our management, but now we're really testing it by, if you can't see them. There's, you know, we'll have some other hot tips around security and equipment and that kind of thing, but I think it's important for managers and for employers to really self-reflect on, are we actually trusting these people to work, you know, or are we assuming that they want to work from home so they don't have to work very much? But I mean, it's a matter of really focusing on the output and not micromanaging on the journey along there, and just having the accountability built in around the output. So we'll talk about accountability next, but the trust and connecting people are all definitely connected.
And I think studies show that people actually tend to work more when they work at home, because they are making up for, like Danielle mentioned, that guilt of like, oh, I'm at home, like I better be working. And you're always at the office.
There's a lot of stereotypes out there about it, and I feel like it's probably people who wish they could work from home and are just a little bit jealous. And you know, because you're right, there are studies showing this. Yeah.
Well, back to my earlier point, there's working from home, and that's the odd luxury, and then there's really working from home from a proper office. And I'm always careful to distinguish the two. They're very different where the planning's gone in. So is it my turn for hot tip number 3?
It is, yes.
Perfectly dovetailed into accountability. So Yeah, we all have that massive pile of laundry that's just screaming at us to be folded, and lots of things that we want to get done in our home environments. But how do we figure out how the work gets done? And as much as we love policies at Spring Law, we love things in writing generally, like job descriptions or workflow plans, commitments between supervisors, managers, and the employees. So the first two bullets here, identifying expectations of work volume and substance, and clarifying reporting relationships and responsibilities. Those things are perfect things to set out in writing, and do it collaboratively with your workforce, ideally, so that they have buy-in, and you don't have to agree to all of the employees' suggestions, but knowing what works for them may not be a hardship at all for the employer, and it could be a win-win. So sit together and figure out what the expectations are and who they're reporting to and who they can reach out to if they're feeling they need support or they're feeling isolated or whatever it may be. So having some kind of planning document, I think, is really important and something to refer to, and then regular check-ins on that as it might evolve. Setting out clear expectations around hours of work and specific consistent times the employee will be available is important. It's especially important for more junior employees and employees who are new to the remote work situation, I would say. And at the beginning, you might have, enforce regular hours. Enforce is the wrong word, because you're working together on what's going to work, and you're trying to be collaborative. But have regular hours where everybody knows when the employee is available, and stick to those hours so that work can get done, and we know when people are accessible. Yeah, I think that sticking to the conventional hours is important. And then as the accountability issue evolves and everybody's getting things done and things are moving well, then you can move away and build in that flexibility that everybody loves so much about remote work arrangements. You got to start small, see how it works, and evolve out from there, and document the conversations along the way, not to paper things and become legal about it, but just so everybody has an understanding of what the relationship and what the situation is going to look like in this relatively new type of arrangement.
But also to paper things.
Yeah, but also we are lawyers at the end of the day, so we do like to paper things.
Nice try, Marnie.
So that work.
When you threw in the legislation and the nice remote work session here, you had to talk about Canada Labor Code, so I'm going to talk about it in writing.
What dovetails around the accountability piece is just communication with each other and team building, because if I need to reach out to someone because I have a question or I need a hand on something, if I can see them down the hall if we were in a traditional bricks and mortar, but in a virtual environment, that's not possible. So, I mean, how our firm works is we all have similar equipment. We all have a phone where we can see each other. We are on a chat channel all day long. So we just, if one of us is going for lunch, we just pop in, hey, stepping out for lunch, and that way, and trying to set regular lunchtime hours, for example. So we just know that person's hands off for that time period. And just communicating. It's just sharing information with each other as opposed to micromanaging your employees. And that's why the trust piece is so important, that it is definitely connected.
I just thought of one thing before we move on to our next red hot tip is making sure you train your supervisors and managers on how to manage the remote workforce, because it may be very new to them. So make sure they're equipped to manage these people and know to check in and have that same kind of planning document with your supervisors and managers as you do down the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So hot tip number 4 is face-to-face. So even though we are remote, like Lisa said, with that communication piece, and sometimes, it's a good idea to pick up the phone or to actually meet in person just to build those relationships. So there's a lot of asynchronous communication in a remote situation where we're like on a chat, and that means that it's not in sync. So we're not necessarily saying hi, it's hi on the chat, and maybe 20 minutes later the person says hi back, right? So that requires a bit of skill, but I think the younger workforce is pretty comfortable with that, just because of texting, and I learned to type using MSN Messenger.
I may have Googled that word last night.
Asynchronous.
It's a little bit new to me.
I should have Googled how to pronounce it.
But I kind of heard the word.
Asynchronous, I think. So sometimes that type of communication is not going to be the best choice. So when we are coaching people on how to manage these remote working relationships, if you're providing feedback or if you need to say something that's particularly important or sensitive, remember the phone exists, right? So pick up that phone and just say, have that actual conversation with the person. Or we use video chats a lot, so that's also a nice way to just kind of feel more connected. A lot of
gifts. Don't forget the gifts. A lot of gifts. Make us feel very connected.
Chats, gifts in the chat is very helpful for sure. Retreats are something that a lot of remote workplaces do, where they do actually get the workforce together at least once a year or something like that. Our team gets together 4 times a year, and that's just a nice time when you do actually get to know people a little bit differently and a little bit more, because they're even though we're remote, there is still value in building those relationships in person. But as anyone who's fallen in love over the phone, online dating, no, you can really get a long way without meeting in person. So
Very true.
Okay.
Over to Danielle for equipment.
Okay, hot tip number 5, equipment. Equipment is a big part of the remote workplace. For example, our remote offices include a laptop, 3 monitors, a scanner, a printer, a shredder, a phone, a sidecar for the phone, a webcam, and the list goes on. The reality is that not all remote workplaces will need all this equipment, but it's important to keep in mind that your employees will have potentially a lot of equipment in their remote office, which is oftentimes their home. So you want to make sure in advance that they will be okay with having all this equipment in their personal space long term, and that the equipment will be in a safe space and protected, as Hilary mentioned. You will want to keep track of all the equipment each worker has, and a tip is to gather the serial number of each piece of equipment, so that when the day comes when your employee moves on or is terminated, you know exactly what equipment you need to get back from them. An easy way to do that is to take a picture of each piece of equipment and the serial number. So what you want to determine really is, what do your remote workers need? Whether you will be providing this equipment. For example, if you're working with remote contractors or consultants, you likely won't be providing their equipment, but if they're employees, you likely will. And if your employees are using their own personal laptops, that can present security and confidentiality issues. So, and then finally, who will be choosing the equipment, them or you? Do you want consistency in the equipment that your remote employees use? That can be useful. So consistency can be useful for troubleshooting and technical issues, which sometimes is not uncommon, unfortunately. But it's nice to be able to just call, another employee and troubleshoot and just figure it out, because everyone's using the same equipment.
Yeah.
And on to the next.
Okay. I'm just going to very quickly, I'm mindful that we want to keep our webinars to 30 minutes. So just a quick comment on Basecamp. They're a technology company in California. They've been around for 20 years, and they've really emerged as a leader on workforces, and they have hardly any attrition and turnover, which is fairly unusual for, in the tech sector. And a lot of it is how much time they spend on thinking through what will make an employee happy, and not tying that to location. And so it's I encourage you to take a look at the the founders, the co-founders have written a couple of books on this that are really great reads about how to make your workplace more appealing, and it's a lot of it is tied to the location and thinking through where people work and making sure they feel connected regardless of where they work. Legal considerations.
And Basecamp is what, like 100% remote, I think, right, Lisa?
They do have a physical space for meetings and that kind of thing as well, though. I don't think it's 100% remote. I think that's the thing, is it's a bit of a hybrid.
Okay. So legal considerations for remote workers: make sure everything is in writing. You know, we think that's really important, even if Marnie doesn't. She really does. Think about the privacy and data security things that we mentioned before. Just like if stuff is going to be out of a central office and in a cloud, and really think through and I would say get some professional advice on how to manage that. Just because obviously data leaks are a really big deal. Payroll considerations are something to keep in mind. If you have employees working all across the country or all across the world, there is going to be different legislation that applies to those employees. So if we had an employee in Alberta, they'd be subject to Alberta law, even though our firm is Toronto based, right? So in that case, we'd have to figure all of that out, and that could just be some extra legwork. Probably worth it though, for that access to the wider talent pool. And then remote terminations are an interesting thing, but if you have a totally remote worker, you don't want to make them fly across the country so you can fire them. You can terminate over the phone, but you need to, of course, do that sensitively, and all those same considerations apply. So it still needs to be in writing, over email would be probably fine, but just think about that and make a plan. So it's a little different than being able to walk someone out of an office, right? Because you want to get their equipment back if that's something that the company owns. And you also want to make sure that all of your data and stuff that they have access to is going to be secure after they know they're leaving. So those are just extra little nuances to keep in mind if terminating a remote employee. And I will turn it over to Marnie to address some common challenges.
Okay, so scheduling challenges can be tricky, particularly for employers who are operating over different time zones. And we think it's important to have a regular, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 things in the calendar weekly, and to pick a time that suits everybody's schedule, figure out collaboratively what that might be, and really stick to it so that it stays in everyone's calendar at the same time, and encourage attendance at that, because we do ours by video and we have very regular check-ins, and it's very good for connectedness and workflow. Language and cultural barriers. So again, it comes down to communication, checking in, making sure that an employee hasn't gone silent and slipping through the cracks, and because of various things, but language and cultural barriers might be one of the reasons. So really just staying connected and staying in touch, and making sure your managers and supervisors are keeping in touch and track with people is very helpful. Catching tone and humor in written communications. I'm sure we all know that things in writing are different, and so just being mindful of what communications are appropriate, and following up if something might have been misinterpreted. Again, back to common sense and communication, and it's not everybody's thing. So just being extra mindful, and again, supervisors, managers, making sure that communication flows are positive, and helping the remote work situation, because it's an important thing to be mindful of. Highlighting the remote employees' wins is very important, and again, comes down to communicating often. But we at Spring Law, we're very collaborative, and we share work product and content regularly, and we've recently implemented a way to track what folks are sharing, and I think it's a great idea, because we're communicating regularly and we're keeping up to speed on all legal developments, and it's measurable. It's not intended to pit employees against each other, but it's put some goalposts, and it's very encouraging. So there's that, and then there's just the individual communications with employees by managers, supervisors, and anyone on the team, and complimenting successes, because it can become lonely in a remote work environment. So lots of positivity, and that I'm sure occurs in all of your respectful workplaces anyway, but it's extra important in the remote environment. And remember, address problems early and often, and it's the key to success in remote workforce. We can't hammer away the communication piece enough. And that's it for addressing common challenges.
Okay, thank you. Takeaways. So, there is a business case to be made for remote work in most workplaces, but not all. So I think that's an important piece, is that remote isn't for everybody. I think, 5 years ago, nobody thought a law firm could be remote. So I think we're heading into a world where, we can redefine what is remote, but there's some clear things that are not. So that's, I think, a threshold question for every employer to think through. And then, Jason Fried is one of the co-founders of Basecamp. Work doesn't happen at work is one of his quotes. And this idea that, if you tell your employee, or you ask your employee, you've got a big project, where do you want to work on that? Where do you get your most work done? It's probably not at the hustle and bustle of the desk in the middle of, especially these open concept type offices that will die out at some point, I think. But the work doesn't happen only sitting at your desk, and so it's being very flexible and open to where an employee is going to do their best work. That's a win for the company. And paying attention to the needs of your employees as much as you can, and having that open door where they can communicate, but also communicating back to your employees about what the business needs, and what is the purpose of remote, and what are the needs and the requirements from employees in order to really, on this two-way street, make remote work. And, they have to have a bit more initiative, and they have to be able to ask questions. So how do you build that infrastructure to make sure that all flows evenly? So we didn't have time to answer some questions that were coming in, so we will reach out to you individually after. Feel free to give a call to anyone on our team. This is our legal team. It includes our law clerk and our articling student as well. And we have a couple of other admin staff that are critical to our team and to our remote environment. But if you have any questions about how to manage your own employees' risks, if you're about to terminate an employee who's a remote worker, just give us a call. And thank you very much for attending today. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully in December at our next session, which will be our 2019 wrap-up. We're going to just, it'll be a bit of a laundry list of the hot issues from 2019 to just sort of wrap up current legal issues to wrap up the year. So hopefully we'll see you all next month, and thank you for attending today.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.